All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the LAFCO meeting of Monday, June 3rd, 2024, a special meeting. May I have roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Moeller.
Here.
Commissioner Painter.
Here.
Commissioner Ramos is absent as of now. Commissioner Budamus, Commissioner Gallagher, and Commissioner Khan.
Here.
Thank you. And let the record reflect that Commissioner Khan is serving in the spot of Commissioner Leary, who is absent today. And we have a quorum.
All right, so I will go to item number 3, approval of the agenda. Are there any questions or comments about the agenda before we move on that? Okay, then we will go ahead and approve the agenda, and I can do that.
I'll make a motion that we approve today's agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 5, the commission workshop. So we will go into a workshop mode, holding a public workshop and discussion.
You might want to take public comment.
Yeah, I was just going to finish reading the notice there. And provide direction to staff regarding a support services agreement with Napa County and becoming a more independent LAFCO. So with that, we'll go ahead and find out if there is any public comment at this time. Oh, I see you're saying on item number 4.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you. So that's right. I'm going to go back to number 4. Do we have anyone here? No. And no, we're not using phone lines today. So thank you, Commissioner Mueller. So back to item number 5, the commission workshop. I will turn it over to our Executive Officer, Brendan. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the commission. So this item will be it's a public workshop, so we can have a discussion about a topic that is in our strategic plan, which is to pursue greater LAFCO independence. And today, your Assistant Executive Officer, Dawn Middleman Longoria, will take the lead on the presentation. And I do see a commissioner has arrived, so I'm going to pause, and I think we should wait a moment.
Maybe when she arrives, we can say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I've skipped about 2 different agenda items, so thank you. You're helping me recover. Okay. My apologies. I was at the airport commission. No problem. Commissioner Mueller, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I'd be happy to.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, so back to item number 5, the workshop that we will be running through today.
Great. As I was saying, Dawn will take the lead on this presentation. However, staff and council are available to hop in if there are any questions or if additional context may be needed. So I'll hand over the floor to Dawn.
All right, thank you very much. The main thing to note on this particular report for this workshop is that it provides an overview, it provides some preliminary information, but certainly any decisions are up to the commission. So as your executive officer mentioned, one of the 3 goals from the strategic plan that was adopted in July of this past year was to continue gaining greater LAFCO independence. So as just a brief, try to go with a very brief background here. There are questions that often come up about, is LAFCO an independent agency? And if so, why? And so on and so forth. And the state legislature decided 25 years ago, confirmed that LAFCO is in fact an independent agency. And their decision was based on extensive hearings and so forth that came out of the Commission on the 21st Century. And the commission, one of the things they concluded was that there was a perception of bias because LAFCO is an organization that's overseeing other local agencies, and therefore it should be unbiased. So a couple of the changes or things that they did recommend was that the commissioners be independent, that they take off the hat of their appointing agency, and that they make their decisions based on the needs of the county as a whole. Another recommendation was that the public member be voted on by each of the representing agencies. So in our case, that would be a county representatives and the city representatives. In some LAFCOs, that includes special district representatives. And then another recommendation basically was that to make changes in the commission really wasn't enough to achieve that independence, that they believe that independent staff was a very important element that should be included in that recommendation. So rural LAFCOs, some meet very rarely. So they were not included in this need for separate staff and so forth. But any of the more medium to high activity LAFCOs were included in this, and certainly Napa LAFCO is definitely high activity LAFCO based on not only our number of proposals and projects per year, but also just on the fact that this is a proactive commission. This commission doesn't sit back and wait for things to come to you. You adopt municipal service reviews that are very thorough. You conduct strategic planning sessions and adopt work plans that are very thorough and address a number of issues. We have Commissioner Cottrell and Painter are both on our legislative committee, so we follow legislation that affects LAFCOs. And then also we're very active in the CalLAFCO, the state organization. So Commissioner Moeller is president of that organization right now, and Commissioner Leary is also on that board for CalLAFCO. And then your assistant executive officer serves as one of the assistant directors, and for CalLAFCO, and Napa LAFCO receives $4,000 a year for that activity. As well, LAFCO has garnered a number of awards over the past few years. The Mike Gotch Protection of Agriculture and Open Space Award was awarded to Napa LAFCO based on the Green Island Project. Your assistant executive officer received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the state organization, and our legal counsel's firm received an award this last time for Outstanding Associate Member. And then also LAFCO did receive the Mike Gotch Excellent in Public Service Award, and that was for the Napa Pipe Project, which I think all of Napa is thrilled that that one's moving forward with Costco. And then the Outstanding Commissioner Award was given to Commissioner Moeller. So we are very active and very well known and recognized across the state. So as a result of these recommendations from the Commission on the 21st Century, then the code sections for LAFCO were rewritten dramatically. So it went from Cortese-Knox Act to Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act. And there were a number of changes that were reflected in that change in that act. And typical with other code sections, shall is a requirement, may is optional. So the wording in there is that I've included the code sections. 56331.4 states that commissioners shall exercise independent judgment on behalf of the county as a whole. That the public member shall be voted, shall have a vote from the representing agency. So as here again, that's the county and the city for Napa LAFCO. And the other piece is that LAFCO staff shall be independent. Specifically, the code section states that LAFCO shall appoint its executive officer, that LAFCO shall appoint legal counsel, and that the commission may appoint staff as it deems appropriate. So, and then the other piece of this is that LAFCOs may contract with any public agency or a private provider. So that gives that flexibility to LAFCO to make that decision how their needs can best be approached. So this brings us to the current contract with the county, which was attached to this report. And I think anyone who has had a contract with some service provider out there, it is common over time to want to review that contract and see if that contract still fits the needs. In this case, the contract is 22 years old. In 2015, attempts were started to amend that contract and make some changes, but that nothing has really occurred. So your staff, as a response to the strategic plan request there, goal, your staff did some analysis of the cost and time for LAFCO staff to comply with the requirements that the county needs to have happen. And then we also contacted other LAFCOs for their recommendations on how do they handle these things? Who do they turn to? I mean, we weren't just going to pick up the phone book and, look at the first one we could find. We really did some research on this. And obviously reputable firms. Now, it should be noted that that we had some bids in here, but this is, as I say, all very rough information. It's meant to be very preliminary. And I would jump to what is really the crux of this, which is your last page, which is page 8. And that is, as noted, there's a perception of not being biased. If the personnel is through the county. And so basically the commission at this point right now, although the current contract states that the county will provide LAFCO with the staff that it deems necessary and that it has set a budget for. So those two factors in place. Now, so the recent experience that we had was our secretary, part-time secretary, retired in 2021. And it was getting fairly common around LAFCOs around the state to have a clerk analyst type position because they felt like it's a broader span of talents and requirements there that can better fit the need of that particular position, especially with small staff. So with that, we began to work with the county personnel, and it did take over a year to try to establish a position of clerk junior analyst and to be able to fill that position. And quite frankly, it was quite difficult for your staff at that time. We were basically filling in for a vacant position as well as our other staff responsibilities. And staff and the work program suffered as a result of that. So that's kind of the bottom line of this is, does LAFCO have control over its staff? And if so, how quickly can that happen? How smoothly can that occur? So then going back on your report to page 5, we've got some numbers there on the time it takes for LAFCO to comply, staff to comply with some of the different requirements of the county. Now, the county, of course, is a large organization with 1,500 employees. An organization of this size has to have a very robust program to keep track of all of the needs and variations in the various departments and so forth. And our issue is just that for a 3-person staff, it becomes very onerous to try to comply with all of those. I've included a chart that kind of goes down what does it take us for our typical professional work, such as proposals, whether they're more simple or complicated, municipal service reviews, these kind of things. These are the things that we deal with on a regular basis. And to get an idea of, basically, it's costly for LAFCO staff to comply with some of the necessary requirements that the county has to have in place. One example that I would give is reimbursement for business expenses. And in the code section, I do have that on page 6 here, the code section that does state that the commission members and alternates shall be reimbursed for actual amount of their reasonable and necessary expenses. Unfortunately, reimbursement for commissioners and staff can take a significant amount of time. Unfortunately, that commissioners and staff have put out their own personal credit cards for these expenses. It might be for a conference or something like that, and that can be fairly significant, not just a lunch out. And in our experience, it has taken months to get that reimbursement back to anyone. An example that I give is a $12, and it was an approved business expense. It wasn't, anything out of the ordinary, but it took 10 months to get reimbursed on that one, and a considerable amount of cost for LAFCO staff to comply with those. Now, from this, I go into, on page 7, I go into possible service providers. And obviously, that first one, regional government services, we wouldn't go with that. That's way too expensive. We have another estimate that's come in now at $5,000 for the year to do those services. So as I say, this is a work in progress, but it gives you an idea about that there are other service providers out there, and that we would be taking a close look at what can they offer, what are our needs, what are the costs, that type of thing. We're really going to be taking a careful look at that sort of thing. And there are upfront costs, and then there's just regular yearly costs. In some places, the yearly costs would actually be less for us to go this way. So basically, what we're asking in this is, we're really asking for guidance from the commission to have you weigh in and tell us what next steps you want to see from this. And that's basically where we are. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Did you want to add something as well?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple quick comments. Something that certain commissioners may be wondering, what did we do when we lost our secretary in 2021? What options did we explore? So I actually did start a recruitment to try to fill the position as extra help, to just immediately get somebody as fast as I could just to take care of the clerical duties. Unfortunately, there were only 2 qualified candidates, and when I interviewed them, it was clear I would spend the next 6 months training them, and then their extra help contract would be up, and we wouldn't get much actual value. We needed someone immediately who knew how to do the job. So we did explore more options than simply we're going to create a new position. So creating the position that Stephanie has, clerk junior analyst, it really did come out of necessity. We needed that flexibility. If one of us is out on vacation or sick, we need someone to be able to fill in and assist with some of the analytical duties above and beyond simply secretary clerical duties. So I wanted to mention that. I apologize, the other comment has escaped me. It may come back and I'll jump in, but for now I think it'll be great to get the commission's preliminary thoughts on this. And if you have any questions that you feel have gone unanswered and we need to research further, staff wants to hear that so we know what to focus our time on. Happy to turn it over to the commission.
Great, thank you. And I would remind the commissioners that what we're looking to do today is to give feedback, ask more questions if we have them. And so there's not necessarily a motion, a formal motion that we're looking for as much as feedback. But at this point, I'd open it up and ask for any questions that folks have or feedback, thoughts. Commissioner
I'll be
Painter.
bold and jump in. Thank you, Dawn, for the information and the summary staff report. It was really helpful. It was especially helpful to get a copy of the county agreement that, as you said, goes back a number of years, but it's been amended over the years. So it's not that it's not active and current, but when you go back to the base document, it's quite old. But that base document to me was really helpful because what it included were attachments that described. Attachment A was staffing, insurance, purchasing, admin, supervision, coordination. I don't have to read the whole thing, but each attachment talked about the service areas that were important for us as LAFCO to contract with somebody to do. And so to me, the question right now, and I'll just speak for myself obviously here, I think we've worked really hard to address the perception of bias. I think we've talked about that a lot in training. I'm wearing no hat right now, but I don't come in. We all have information on our various jurisdictions, and that's helpful. But I think we all very clearly understand our roles in terms of this notion of perception of bias. That's just my opinion. So the question to me that is more, what is the most efficient and best way to contract for these services that are going to be really important from here moving forward, has been in the past? Is the county the best to be able to provide some of those or not? When you look back again at that original 22-year-old document, obviously we don't need services by Napa County Council. So that's probably in one of those amendments was eliminated somewhere. So I do think it could be beneficial instead of, having a core document and then amended, to somehow just kind of wipe the slate clean and do something fresh and new. On the other hand, I also think, while we are active, as you said, and we're well known, and we do a lot of work with a very small staff, I think we also could benefit in a lot of ways by working with a larger organization that has the resources that we need for some of the basic, issues like auditing, like even perhaps HR, and you described that in the staff report. So I think for me, the choices are about, and then, one other point I'll make is I definitely sense, and I'm very mindful of the frustrations that you described, taking 10 months to get reimbursed $12. I can't speak to why that is or why that isn't. But is that the reason that we want to make these wholesale changes? Or is there a better way to do business? So I'm kind of at the point where I feel like maybe we want to just consider, taking the entire contract and saying, you know what, it's kind of getting complicated to read, right? It's getting complicated to look at it all. Does it make sense to just do a refresh and then select and hear from other commissioners of what is important to add in terms of attachments so that we get the best service we can? I mean, I don't want our limited staff to be spending hours and hours coordinating with who's doing the audit, or the computers are broken, or, all the things that will come up. Not that they might come up, they will come up by doing it all on our own. Those are my comments for now.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
I have some.
Yeah, Commissioner Gallagher.
Is this on? Hello. I think you can hear me either way. So I'm sorry for being a little late. I did want to say regarding this idea that we are trying to, quote, become more independent. I think that's I was struggling with that because I thought this doesn't really sound like the goal exactly. I think that, some of the information at the beginning of our report, states really clearly that LAFCOs are an independent government agency. So we already are independent. So it's not so much about becoming more independent because we already are, but I think it's, what has been said already, that we're looking at being sure that we are not perceived as biased toward the county or any of the cities. And I think that in addition to that, it's trying to be as efficient as possible. So where I see the issues, and because I've had the experience of working in an agency that contracted with the county for certain services, I do think the sort of accounts receivable, accounts payable, like sort of some of the basic accounting functions don't necessarily work very well through the county. It can take an extremely long time to get things done. And it is really difficult to not have, for people to have to use their own personal credit to book conferences, et cetera, and not have frankly, a card, a government card of some kind issued to the agency that the agency just uses and has their own independent organization or that is actually doing their APAR, for example. So I think that can be really not just frustrating, it can put you in a bad spot with vendors. I had the experience of being in a very bad spot with several vendors because they would be paid late on a regular basis. So that was one of my thoughts. And then I am curious about IT. I see that the IT costs are really, really high because of the regular formula that's used to divide up the IT expenses across the county. And I am curious if that might be something that we would look at. But also, I'd like to know from staff, what is the service level from IT at the county? Do you find it to be quick? Do you find it to be efficient? Do you find it to be easy to work with, et cetera? Or what if there are problems there? What are those problems? And then also, I think we're going to look forward toward the budget. And having these two different budgets to look at. But I think also it is hard to know how much staff time could be saved or spent depending on A1 or A2. It's not something you would see in the budget because the administrative services line item remains the same in both of those. But in terms of how much time is the staff spending on managing their issues with the county versus not. And of course you have to spend time managing issues with vendors too. So there's a balance there. So I guess those were just a couple of questions that I had. I had some more questions on the actual budget piece, but that was around the first part of this.
Thank you. I'll turn to Commissioner Khan, and then I can ask staff if there's things that you want to respond to, and Commissioner Mueller, did you have comments also?
Well,
Okay, perfect.
Commissioner Ramos hasn't had a chance either.
Unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to sit on some of the early discussions, so it's very interesting for me to kind of see, where you were thinking. And I have run into some similar situations that Commissioner Gallagher has in terms of trying to get reimbursed. I actually called Tracy Schultz because I know her, and she said, "Oh, well, somehow we changed our new system and we forgot to switch the little thing that says that LAFCO can get the money." So, those are the kind of things that if you have it either at the county or in different organization, you should have a service agreement. At least have some, policy to say, if possible, this should be 48 hours, this should be 2 weeks, and what do you follow up with that? That's typically what you would have with a new agency or new attorneys. You would try to understand what their timelines are and so at least you can go back and say, granted, there was an oversight, but it was extremely frustrating, and I felt so bad, I just decided to take Stephanie out of the middle of it. I like the approach of trying to, rather than piecemeal pieces of it, try to look, because however you do it, it's not going to happen quickly, so you might as well take the time if you're researching these others. And as you already mentioned, Commissioner Gallagher, I don't know if managing 6 state agencies is going to put a strain and complication rather than 1 or 2. And the recommendation in here was to keep the county for the health issues. Okay. And so, those are the things that you really have to weigh. You only a 3-person team here, and so, but if you start looking at that differently and saying, if you had to have a new contract, what would you want to have in it? And I like that approach. And I hadn't been in the early discussion, so that was just my kind of observation. Thank you.
Can I pass I'd like to see what Commissioner Ramos' thoughts are.
Okay, Commissioner Ramos?
Okay, so I think this is really going to probably end up, if my crystal ball is any good, being a bit of a hybrid model. So some of the first, when I look at these, the SSA document, that's why I really wanted the whole commission to get that kind of before, to kind of take a look at it. I've kind of been through these before, and I always say, if I can't understand it, I'm just going to assume that maybe 1 or 2 other people can't understand it either. And, really having, all these amendments and going back then to the main document and then think, okay, I've got this. And then you run into another amendment, it's like, which amended, an amendment or the main document. It's just too confusing, at least for my mind. And so I think that that definitely needs to be changed. Now, I think there are some background things that we really need to do. And so my kind of current thought is to maybe have our attorney figure out what attorney you would talk to in the county, and just have a very broad level discussions, like, hey, let's take a look at this. It's really old. Our commission is discussing it. They really, at this point, it's probably too early to tell, if we want to keep some of these pieces or keep some of the other ones, and really just sit down and, meet and greet each other, because they're the ones who are going to have to kind of put something together and really find out if there is any major constraints ahead of it. And, that might be a little back and forth between them. It's just like, sure, we'd be able to kind of look at this, and depends on what you guys kind of come up with. So we kind of set those ground rules to make sure that we don't get too far down a path and then like, oh no, you can't do that type of thing. So, so I think that would be kind of the first step I would take. And I really like some of, well, I'll say all of Commissioner Gallagher's requests. I do think that there are some of these things that if you get the right, outsourced company, it will be very little input, for a lot of good output. I just kind of went through this with a lot of the modernization I'm doing with LAFCO, really looking at a lot of our, policies. And there was some stuff that we spent hours and hours and hours trying to figure it all out. And so we just kind of like threw it out and, got, we didn't really need a bookkeeper. There was QuickBooks Online. By the time you send it to another company, you might as well just input it on QuickBooks Online. And then, that can kind of help build a budget. So I think some of these things, and I noticed in the report, what do we write, like 6 or 8 checks a month? I can probably do that in 30 minutes. So I can't imagine it could take that much time for, somebody to do that and do some quick turnaround. So I guess the real issue to me is, as a commission, do we really want to take the time, and maybe we do, really kind of talking through these with, some more micro workshops like this. I think then we need to decide the frequency of that, to really, okay, accounting. So what does that really mean? And, what are some of the options? And just kind of take them as small bites. I don't, think that necessarily we have to have a great urgency. We haven't done it for 25 years, so I don't really think that, this has to happen over the next, 3 months. But starting to make a decision about moving ahead, I think that does require some urgencies. Are we going to, do this, and what are we going to do? And then, really take the time we need to kind of do it right. And, I do think our budgeting is quite difficult, fitting into a really complex county system that really kind of works with them. I mean, like, for example, some of these costs, that are kind of like all under administrative services, really kind of breaking down what all that is there's layers and layers, and you don't know who to talk to because a lot of that stuff is rolled up. I understand how complex budgets are, and so even finding the person to ask, it's just difficult. So some of the stuff is really going to be kind of hard, and staff can address it maybe another time about, when you say, okay, how much does it really cost to do this? It's an unknown, a bit of a black box. And so, yeah, with a lot of time, you can probably figure it out. But some of that stuff, I think we'll just have to go through. So that's really what I would kind of recommend, that we kind of at least start by, getting our legal team and somebody from the county sitting down and say, this might be coming. What are the big constraints here that we need to kind of think about? And then us kind of going through and, tackling the stuff that's really the biggest problem. And, it could also kind of come out that, a lot of it is really not having our staff knowing exactly, sometimes they just pair equal staff to equal staff. That's just the way it is. But sometimes we might really need to escalate it to the chair of that department to figure out, to delineate. And so some of those things are just complicated, I think, for our staff. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone. Did you want to add something?
To some of Commissioner Muller's points of questions that just through the process already asked, that our council would talk to, our LAFCO council would talk to Cheryl Bratton, our county council. So that would be if there were agreements in terms of wanting to do a new contract, it would be through our county council. In addressing the more immediate ones, reimbursement's tough. Government reimbursement is tough. I've been a government employee at the federal level, at the state level, at the county level. I have always been dissatisfied with reimbursements. The only time I was okay with reimbursements was when I worked for a private law firm. So that one is a really, really tough one. I personally just went through it, as a supervisor, through a really tough reimbursement. So I definitely understand that. I think one of the, I think one of the ways that we can really work towards getting a quicker resolution on reimbursements would be actually meeting with our auditor controller staff and making sure that there is familiarity with our per diem policy as well as versus direct reimbursement, just because per diem policies are a lot quicker to process than actual receipts. So that would be one suggestion to the reimbursements question. For HR, yeah, it's hard. That's not a unique circumstance. I think in terms of what I heard, none of these experiences that have been identified as challenges are unique to LAFCO. And I think that the question really then is understanding that there is not a uniqueness in your experience in contract for services as a commission. Do we still want to pursue something different? I think that's the real question. None of this is unique. I'm not saying it's stellar and great. It's dealing with a governmental organization, but if it were a unique experience, I would say that would certainly warrant perhaps a greater desire and urgency to pursue a different type of contract for services. But when it is not unique, and looking at some of the cost differentials, I think really, streamlining the contract is a great suggestion, so that we're not looking over and over again at different amendments, but also being able to identify, for lack of a better term, like a work plan that works through some of the challenges of reimbursement and HR.
Thank you. The comments that I have, I think, build on a lot of what's been said. Commissioner Painter, I like this idea of a general update with, adding in the pieces that make sense based on, and I agree with Commissioner Muller, this concept that we're probably moving forward with some kind of hybrid agreement, and how we determine what those things are is going to require some more study and some more data. And to Commissioner Ramos's point, some of the frustrations that exist here are not unique to LAFCO. That doesn't mean that it's not worth including them or looking at how they impact us. So one of the things, and again, Dawn, thank you very much for this presentation, and I think the charts are really helpful. What I think might be a next step is to build some kind of chart matrix that has the items that we're talking about, accounting, hiring, IT, right? And having some columns that have, because I think in all of these, we should be able to articulate a functional pro of moving away from the county contract, or the county being the service provider, but also being aware of a functional downside. With hiring, one of the things that jumps out for me is the county has a great PERS program, right? And that will be, can we shop that elsewhere? Maybe, if so, great. But, so something that lists out functional pros, functional cons, and then talks about the costs of keeping something in-house versus going out of house. Because I think those are all, we want to look at the costs, but we also want to look at what we gain or what we don't have by it. And Commissioner Khan, I like this idea of thinking about a service agreement so there's expectations that can be managed. And I'm glad to have a couple of examples too of what the team is running into, and that's got to be incredibly frustrating to wait 10 months for $12. And also, how can we improve those communications, right? And I know with my supervisor colleagues, we've seen examples before of departments being challenged by similar types of things. And it turns out what they needed to do was establish a better line of communication with the auditor controller. And that didn't solve all the problems, but it could solve some of them. So I love that you called the auditor controller to get some information too. So I think this idea of council meeting, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think the other thing, back to Commissioner Gallagher, your point about, and I think you made this point too, that we're conscious that of the importance of the perception that we are not biased. And I think the fact that we're working through these things, what I'm seeing more is I want to be able to make this work easier and more efficient for our staff. I think I haven't heard complaints about bias, so that's a positive thing. We want to always be aware of that. But to me, that all the items that we're talking about are to make this process run more efficiently for staff and the commission. So with that, we've just provided a lot of feedback and comments. Are there questions or clarifications the staff wants to get from this group at this point? Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
If I may, and also we want to give an opportunity for public comment. So not sure if that should come now or if you'd like me to respond to some of the questions and comments first.
Why don't I find out? Is there any public comment?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for being here.
Yes, so it came back to me, the item I had forgotten earlier actually related to the $12 reimbursement. I think that my subconscious was trying to forget about that, and that's an embarrassing situation that never should have happened. Long story short, it was me that was subject to this, and I had a lunch and it was a business lunch with an agenda. It was a 3-hour meeting. Went to the county to get reimbursed for it, and my employment contract says that I am eligible for full reimbursement of meal expenses so long as the meal is served during a business meeting. For whatever reason, that was either ignored or not seen, not sure what happened there, but county wasn't allowing it. So at the end of the day, I wanted this issue to just go away, and so I was happy with the $12 reimbursement, and frankly I wish I just didn't pursue anything at all, but anyway, that's in the past. I do want to emphasize that truly nothing is broken. I mean, that example I just shared sounds pretty broken, but that is a unique case that is not common. Can we live with our current contractual agreement with the county? I say absolutely yes. As far as I know, none of the relationships have been irreparably damaged since we've started looking at some of these topics of independence. Are any of these changes urgent? Not in my mind. They're not urgent. So we have time to slow down and come back with more data after we've done a bit more research. And truly, regardless of the outcome today, I believe this has been a valuable experience for our staff and hopefully for the commission to better understand some of the constraints, the challenges, and the benefits we receive through the SSA with the county, because it's the conversation has been oriented towards what's not working, but there are pieces that do work. For example, there was a question about ITS and how responsive are they. County ITS is excellent. We get great service from them. They're very quick to respond when we need help with anything. On that note, we do have a potential alternative provider who would come in at substantially lower cost. That's something that we included as part of the budget, which we'll get to later on the agenda. There would be some upfront transition costs if we went that direction. And then the annual ongoing costs would be about $10,000 instead of $27,000, which we're expecting to pay in the upcoming fiscal year. So that's just food for thought there. And another comment that I wanted to make, since I'm not sure if it has been made clear enough yet, that LAFCO, the commission, you may have an idea in your head of what you want from your staff in terms of titles and classifications, compensation. But the truth is, at the end of the day, it's truly it's county HR department that has the control. They've got the final say. I leave that up to the commission to decide if that's something we can live with. It's been a frustration for our staff to deal with that, but part of that is we didn't know all of their rules going into some of the changes we were pursuing, and so we were learning the hard way, being told, no, it doesn't work that way a lot, and we thought we knew, and we found out we didn't know how it worked, and now we have a much better understanding. So I'm just going to see if there were other questions I can address. So there was a comment about how many checks a month we write, and so it's somewhere around 12 to 15 checks per month. I would defer to Stephanie to confirm that. Just to clarify, I think the comment was, the perception was there may be 6, but it's more than that. It's not a huge number, but it is a decent strain on our staff when we run into some issues. Some of our checks we attempt to pay, or some of our invoices we're attempting to pay are particularly complex. Don't want to get into the reasons why, but PG&E is one of them. It's a shared office situation. And so I think that pretty much addresses what I've got from commissioner comments for now. So turn it back over.
Commissioner Gallagher. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. I really do like the idea that Commissioner Khan had around the service agreements, and I think part of it is being more detailed about how things work and what the expectations are on both sides, because, I think it can be perceived, and this can happen, that, you may have a situation where you're feeling like the auditor controller is making decisions in a way that is discretionary rather than in a way that is following protocol or following, exactly what has been agreed upon. And so if we can get more detail, that might actually help us to also have better communication, because you can point right to the document and say, this is what we agreed to up front. This is what our expectation is. Because I think that there can be the feeling that, not everyone's being treated the same, or not every expense, there may be 2 expenses that look exactly the same, and one's being treated one way, and one's, this one's fine, this one's disallowed. And it gives rise to this perception that this person's just using their discretion. They're just using their, putting their opinion or their, way of thinking upon something, rather than just following the rules or following the contract or following, the agreement in some way. So I think the more that we have written in the agreement, and also we have a meeting with each of those departments to say, okay, this is what is in our service agreement. We want to make sure everybody agrees. We all understand the expectations on both sides. I think that could potentially help quite a bit, because as you said, there were things for HR that, you're headed down one path and then you find out, oh, well, that's not how it works, right? And that shouldn't really happen, because the agreement should set it out in a more explanatory way, so that we don't run into those obstacles all the time.
Thank you. Yeah. Commissioner Painter and then Commissioner Khan.
Yeah, and thank you. Just to elaborate on that thought a little bit more, I like the idea as well about a more detailed service agreement. I mean, in reading the agreement that we have right now, it pretty clearly lays out the fact that we are independent. We could probably do better on that. We could probably add more, obviously more current language with all of the changes that have been made. So I think it's, an opportunity to refresh and update. But the one thing I just want to point out, and listen, I've also worked for government, and now I'm so similarly, so I understand the complexities, but we're government too. So when we are looking to any vendor for services, and some are listed on this, I would want to know, do they contract with government agencies? What is their experience in understanding what our requirements are? Because we're not easy either. So we can't just simply go buy our own new computers and go, get QuickBooks. I do that with my business, but we're government as well. So if we go the path of trying to find another vendor, I think we have to upfront ask what is their experience in working with government agencies, and do, what, otherwise we could be setting ourselves up for problems that we're not even anticipating.
That's a great point. Commissioner Khan.
So one other thing that to think about is, I think you mentioned that earlier, Brendan, is that you've got, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, amendments. So I don't even think it's clear that anybody really knows what that contract looks like. So to me, one of the starting points is like, can we put that all together on a chart and say, what is all these things that are there? Because some of those would be obsolete. So, if you were to change things, it's going to take a time. But I think if you have a starting point of what the contract really is today, that would help you decide, which pieces of it. But as you said, I mean, I went through, I marked out all the page numbers because they were, every year, every other year, there was addendum after addendum. And that is not really any way to do business because, one, some of those are probably obsolete. Some references to the county are probably obsolete. So maybe that's a starting point that isn't so threatening to the county or to the organization, and just say, can we put this together and see what 10 or 15 things this contract should have? And then maybe, you can go back as Commissioner Gallagher said. So just a thought.
Just a quick thought on that. That's really what was kind of started many years ago. We started redlining this. It was a mess. It was so bad. It's a nice thought. We gave it a try. It didn't really work. It was just too complex. So sometimes anyway, so we'll have to let maybe our legal person kind of weigh in on that.
Yeah, I'll just add that there are 10 amendments, and I think most of them are related to rates. And of course, rates go up over time. And so I think those amendments were about making sure the county was reimbursed for its fully loaded rate for the personnel that were providing services. That's something that we would expect that they would continue to request, of course. I think the county has a formula now, and the supervisors in the room might actually know this better than I do, but I think they have a formula now that would make amendments like this unnecessary because they take whatever the base is, and then they put in the other inputs, and then a fully loaded rate comes out the other side. But I'm happy to reach out to County Council and start this conversation if that's what the commission would like me to do.
Thank you. I had a question for you because that came up as you were speaking, Commissioner Painter, which is if we're going out to look for services from private vendors, would we need to do an RFP and have sort of a public bidding process?
Yeah, so you're speaking about the different services in the staff report for the different things that are in there. Yeah, so you would normally go through some kind of competitive solicitation process. Yeah.
So we need to build in that time and cost as part of this kind of chart that we're talking about a little bit. So,
and then I just kind of wanted to wrap up again. So I think what we told staff is that I think it's pretty clear on the legal piece. We're all in agreement. Start a very broad stroke conversation to make sure that there aren't any kind of that you have a conduit and someone to talk to, and more to come later, and making sure that I think it's and maybe you can even talk about I don't think we want to break this contract because it's an active contract. Maybe we want to restate it and update it, or maybe you can advise on that. And then we were going to have staff kind of go through some of the major line items, like accounting and IT and things like that, and really kind of put some of the this is currently how we do it, and then maybe how we'd like to do it, and some of the pros and cons on that, and maybe can we weigh in a little bit on a time frame we want to give staff for expectations? Brendan said there wasn't a great urgency here. Are we talking you want it like in a month? You want it in 6 months? Just thoughts.
Thoughts from the group? I mean, our next meeting is August. Is that correct? So perhaps an update. I mean, I think I appreciate what you've just laid out. That's kind of two different task sets which could be happening at the same time. Again, I think we want to be thorough here, and we want to be right and not fast. And so being able to take the time for you, Gary, to have that meeting, and Dawn and Brendan to be able to start building out this chart, existing conditions, the reason you as staff see a reason to change, right? What's that functional improvement? And then costs. That will take some time. So we could, I think that's a great point though. What should our expectation be? So maybe I could throw out, we ask for a draft update in August without expectation of any sort of final. How does that sound for you? Because I'm also very aware we have a lot of other things we want to be spending time on that are substantive and at the core of our mission. So.
Yeah, so for an update, are you looking for how those conversations have gone, or a draft document that would come in front of you in August?
Conversation is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Just making sure, oh yeah, it looks like once you guys are ready, we have a mechanism to proceed.
Yeah, or we learned something new that we.
Oh yeah, it's like, oh, you can't do that.
Yeah, right.
Let us know ASAP.
Definitely.
I just wanted to make one comment about if the vendors that we reached out to, everyone we talked to does currently work with government in some capacity, and that was a consideration at the very, very beginning. Everybody that we talked to was recommended by other LAFCOs, so that was in the consideration.
That's great. And I appreciate the reference to other LAFCOs too, because I think as you're, not that I don't think anyone is expecting the development of an RFP for any of these yet, but when that time is right, it would be nice to know, what some language is. And also I think it would be interesting to hear from other LAFCOs, how long has this process been if they're looking for an outside vendor for something too. So. All right. Well, with that, it's a little bit after 2 p.m. and I know we have another agenda. I'm going to have us take a break for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back at 2:10 and get on with the rest of the meeting. Thank you. We are back in session, and as we begin again, I just wanted to turn to our Yountville mayor and say thank you so much for letting us use this space. It's very nice to be here.
We're happy to help.
All right, so that will bring us, we are now at item 6 on our agenda today. We have 3 action items on consent and 4 receive report for information only. Does anyone on the commission have questions or want to pull any of the items? Commissioner Painter.
If it's appropriate, I think we just wanted to make a quick comment on the informational report, item F, the legislative report.
So why don't we go ahead, let's think about the order we want to do this. Why don't we see if there's, let's take that item and then we will come back and I can ask for a motion for the entire consent calendar. So Brendan, do you want to help us out with that item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm hoping that Dawn wouldn't mind taking this one, actually. Since Dawn did all of the research, she discovered this item that we're about to discuss and knows the details more intricately than I do. So are you comfortable with that, Dawn?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Definitely. Also, I had a little bit of an update on some of the items that were in here. Assembly Bill 3277 has passed the Assembly, and it is now with the Senate Rules Subcommittee. And that has to do with, it's not as much of we did not send a letter of support or whatever on this one because it does not deal as much with situations that we come across here in Napa County. So it has to do with establishing the property tax exchange amount and whether or not that's always necessary. Sometimes if it's an agency that's an enterprise agency, they're not going to get some of that property tax money anyway. So it's, LAFCOs have to go through that process. So that's basically the news on this one. The other piece that came up and this was after your agenda was posted. And this is a ballot initiative that there's our legal counsel could give us more information on where that is in the process. And I know Commissioner Painter is very involved in this particular one. But basically what it would do is it would in the past, it was common for LAFCOs if there was a fire district consolidation and one district had a tax assessment that had been voted in place by the voters, and then another district did not. So if we did a reorganization and combined those, then what would happen is the benefit assessment of the agency that has that in place would apply to the annexed area. And that would be a simple majority to make that happen, because it would be based on LAFCO's rules and regulations with regard to protests. So this particular proposition, as I said, we have others who are better able to explain it, but it would require a 2/3 vote. And I think the piece that personally concerns me the most is a rollback to 2022 on anything that had already been granted. And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, so what does a fire district do at that point? Do they sell a fire engine so they can pay the taxpayers back, or so? You know, it's a very complicated issue. Now, CSAC, Cal Cities, and then Special District Association all came out in opposition to this. CalAFCO did not take a position on it, partially because CalAFCO is a one-person staff. So I'm sure Commissioner Moeller could explain this one a little bit better, but that was some of the reason. And then also the fact that it's a voter initiative was one of the other reasons that CalAFCO did not. Now, so part of the reason it's being discussed here is because the word did go out to various LAFCOs that this is in existence. There's a great deal of concern being expressed out there because LAFCOs deal with government agencies, efficiency, their ability to provide those services. And so this all fits right in with that. And I know that there have been various individual agencies that have written letters of opposition. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Painter, did you want to add any perspective or information on Cal City's position on it?
This is probably the biggest issue for Cal Cities this year in terms of initiatives to oppose. There's a lot of information on their website. ACA 13 is also somewhat tied to it, because what ACA 13 says is essentially, and I'll look to our council to maybe elaborate on this more. But if you if you put an initiative forward that is requiring a 2/3 vote, that measure should pass by 2/3. So it'll be a really interesting ballot, but I would just ask for a quick update on where the California Supreme Court is on this, because this could make the whole point moot. And then lastly, I would just say, we haven't discussed it as a committee. We just wanted at this point, because it came up, to make you aware that we've been talking about it.
Yeah, so there is a campaign. No, go ahead.
So I'm going to add another thing to this that I have been involved in. The Assemblymember Aguiar Curry will be offering amendment language to ACA 1 that will either be 19 or 20, and that is as of just my meeting this morning at 9:30. So that would restrict the language only to bonds, of reducing the threshold of 55% only to bonds. And so it certainly would have an interplay with ACA 13, but there is only 25 days, 24 and a half to get that through the legislature. So Yeah, we're past noon, so 24 and a half days to get that through the legislature, but that's the next move that should be coming.
Okay, thanks. Gary?
Yeah, so there is a companion measure on the November 5th ballot, as Commissioner Painter mentioned, that if a ballot measure requires a voter threshold for future amendments or approvals, that it would need to pass by that same amount. And so in this case, the Taxpayer Protection Act would need to pass by 2/3 if that measure also passes in November. Legislature put the companion measure on, so both of them will be on November 5 for voters to consider. So separately, there was a lawsuit filed by the state legislature and the governor against the Secretary of State in her official capacity, because she's the one who processes all this and gets all the ballots ready for the statewide elections. The argument in that case is that the Taxpayer Protection Act is in a constitutional revision instead of a constitutional amendment, and a revision needs to be proposed by the legislature, can't be proposed by voters, slightly different process. And so, of course, the Taxpayer Protection Act was proposed by voters through petition, and so if it is a revision, didn't follow the correct process. Oral arguments were held in early May in the California Supreme Court, and a decision from them is expected before June 27th, which, as Commissioner Ramos just mentioned, is really the hard deadline for all of the things that need to happen for the election. So we expect a decision from the Supreme Court on whether or not that can proceed. They could issue an opinion that says this is a revision and therefore this cannot proceed on the ballot, and then direct the Secretary of State not to proceed with the ballot measure. That could happen. Or they could conclude that it's an amendment and then it would still proceed, but we'll be waiting for that opinion.
Great. Thank you for that update, everyone. And that is, this item is not an action item on our agenda, but we could look at bringing back this topic for our August meeting. Is that correct? So we could, okay, great. All right, so with that, we are still on item number 6, consent items. Other questions or a motion? Commissioner Gallagher.
I can't make a motion, but I did want to just say that I took a look at the Cal LAFCO staff workshop summary, and I just wanted to congratulate Stephanie for winning the photo award. And it was at developed lands versus undeveloped lands in California, correct? Or something like that. The juxtaposition of. So anyway, great photographs and congratulations for winning.
Wonderful. Congrats and thanks for flagging that. Other comments or a motion?
I just going to make a, well, I'll wait for, do we have commission comments at the end? I'll wait for that.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. I'll wait.
Okay. So I would love a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion that we can approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Motion by Commissioner Mueller, second by Commissioner Painter. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 7, public hearing items. 7A, we have the final budget for fiscal year 2024-25, an amendment to the schedule of fees and deposits, and work program for fiscal year 2025. Brendan, I'll turn to you on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a bit of quick background. In December, the commission appointed Commissioners Moeller and Leary to the Budget Committee. A preliminary proposed budget was presented on April 8th and was continued to a special meeting on April 25th before it was adopted, with a revision to reduce expenses and revenues each by approximately $8,000 from what was presented that day. That version of the proposed budget that was adopted was circulated for public review, as well as sent by email from me directly to each of the city managers and their finance directors and the county counterparts. There were no written comments received by the May 24th deadline. However, I was invited to attend the Napa Area Managers Group to discuss the budget and give an overview of what some of the changes are needed for, or why we're looking at some changes from previous years. And the consensus out of that meeting was that LAFCO needs to do a better job of showing the difference in cost between the status quo, where we continue with all of our services that are provided by the county under the SSA, versus if we were to go another direction with each of those services, which I would call, for lack of a better term, full independence, even though, as we discussed, LAFCO is an independent agency already. And so toward that end, additional comments were made by several commissioners at the previous meetings looking for similar information, just a better cost breakdown. And I also want to just note that I gave a special invitation to those city managers and the county CEO to come to today's meeting, hoping that they would show up and provide verbal comments. We did not get them yet, but it's possible we may have some trickling in later. But with all of this in mind, the Budget Committee did prepare two versions of the final budget, which you'll find as exhibits to the draft resolution, which is included as Attachment 1. So Exhibit A-1 is the status quo budget with no changes to the existing SSA. Exhibit A-2 assumes that we find alternative providers for all of those services. And so you'll see the overall difference is approximately $23,000, which primarily represents initial one-time costs to transition services to other providers. And then after that first year, the annual ongoing costs appear to be marginally lower than the status quo for many of those, although with the caveat that we do still have some homework to do, and these are not perfect numbers that we can definitely rely on moving into the long-term future. Some of these are quotes we've received for just the upcoming fiscal year. So still some research to do there. And staff did belatedly catch a couple of errors in the staff report. I want to flag that. I'm sure some of you noticed as well that on page 3, under final budget overview in the staff report, it says that reserves are expected to total $361,158 at the end of fiscal year 24-25. This amount is outdated and should say $354,109, which is what you'll see in the exhibits A1 and A2. And so in terms of the percent of budgeted expenses that this would represent, for the status quo budget, A-1, reserves would total 43.2% of expenses, and in A-2, reserves would total 42.0% of budgeted expenses. And then another error was caught on page 4 under services and supplies unit, admin services. The report says that this account, this is expense account, administration services, is proposed to increase to $622,859. This is an error that it was holdover language from the April 25th staff report that was overlooked. The actual amount is correctly identified in the exhibits A1 and A2. And if you look at those, you'll see admin services expense account totals $614,588. So the true amount there is the $614,588. It's the lower amount. And so all attachments, everything from attachment 1 through 10 that references any expense amounts, those are all still correct. The error is truly limited to just the staff report in those two spots. And so the commission is being asked to discuss the two versions of the budget and adopt the preferred version as presented or with further revisions. And I do want to take a moment to remind the commission that some members have expressed a desire to draw down our reserves closer to the policy limit, which our local policy sets a target of maintaining reserves equal to at least 1/3 of budgeted expenses. And toward this end, one option the commission may want to pursue is to take a look at the consulting services expense account. That's account 52310. You'll see there is $45,000 allocated to this account, and that represents the remainder of the consultant contract for the in-progress countywide fire and EMS municipal service review. If it's the commission's desire, we could rely on reserves to cover that $45,000. And so going back to the beginning of the discussion of the countywide fire and EMS MSR, when we first agreed to initiate that project, the expectation was we would spend reserves to cover that amount. And so we do have an opportunity to do that here today if that's the commission's desire. And if we wish to draw down reserves for that purpose, we would reduce the agency dues by a corresponding $45,000. So I'll leave that as food for thought. The next item in this public hearing is a fee schedule amendment, and the only change needed is to update the fully burdened hourly rate, which is informed by whichever version of the budget is adopted today. And if you would like to see how that hourly rate is calculated, see attachment number 9. Both versions of the proposed amendment to the fee schedule are included as exhibits to the draft resolution, which is attachment 2, which would approve the amendments. And so whichever version of the budget is adopted, that will be the version that informs the fee schedule, and thus the resolution will only have one exhibit. And if you'd like to see the track changes on the fee schedule amendment, both versions are included as attachment 10 to the staff report. And it really is just simply limited to the hourly rate. And then finally, we have a work program for fiscal year 24-25, which is included as a part of attachment 3, which is another draft resolution. This time only one exhibit, since it'll be the same either way, whichever budget is adopted. And the work program generally follows the strategic plan, which is included as attachment 5. And on the work program, staff would like the commission to provide some preliminary thoughts, if any, on the Napa Sanitation District Sphere of Influence review, which is scheduled to be presented in draft format in February. I believe it's February. And so importantly, we have been discussing for several months, I say we, LAFCO staff and Napa Sanitation District staff, we've been discussing some possible study areas, and we keep having the same conversation every time we study Napa Sanitation District, and that is we've got to find a way to get public sewer out to Monticello Park and some of the other properties in the area. But the challenges are complex and nuanced. We've had county staff, the Planning, Building, and Environmental Services Director has joined us for a couple of these meetings. And essentially what we're looking for is what's the scope of this area we should be studying? Should it be limited to just Monticello Park? Should it be expanded to a much broader area that takes in parts of Vichy Avenue and other roads in that area out towards Silverado? Essentially, we have an opportunity to contribute to a long-desired project. It's just a matter of doing it right and sequencing the steps in the correct order. And so if the commission has any thoughts to share now, staff would be appreciative, or we can take this up when the report is developed and presented. So with all of that in mind, staff recommends the commission open the public hearing, take testimony, if any, close the public hearing, and adopt the 3 draft resolutions that are included as attachments 1, 2, and 3 with any desired changes. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you so much. With that, I will go ahead and open the public hearing and find out, do we have any public comment? Okay. Great. then I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. And just to kind of echo what Brendan has said, we have before us a few different questions, and maybe what we'll do is take the first set first, and then the question about the last one, the Napasan question, we can do as a separate set of discussions. But I just wanted to clarify, there's a recommendation to adopt, we have two versions of the budget. And so it's what we need to do today is to choose one as a group. Is there a recommendation from staff as to one or the other?
So given the outcome of our workshop, staff, I would personally recommend the status quo budget, which we know is going to be in effect. We know that we're certainly continuing with the SSA into the next fiscal year. So when we started the budget discussion, we weren't as certain where we would land at this point. But
great. Thank you.
Timing.
Thank you for articulating a recommendation there. I think that's helpful. And so that is one issue. And then there's a second issue that you brought up about the reserves that we have and moving them into the consulting services line item as a way to draw down the reserves. So that's a second piece that's out there for discussion. And then any other thing that the commission wants to bring up. So I'll go ahead and turn to my colleagues and find out who wants to start.
Thank you. On the reserve item, I think that instead of my recommendation doesn't come from just keeping at the reserve item limit. It's more of a transparency to our member jurisdictions to be able to say we're not going to overfund the reserve and then simply move it over to another category to have it there. When I had suggested this, I had suggested the drawing down on the reserves to draw down at the same rate that the jurisdictions pay in so that their increase would not have been so much for this next fiscal year. As I've said before, a third is an incredibly high percentage for a jurisdiction that doesn't have the power to declare emergencies. That's really where that reserve, even for us at a 10 to 15% of operating, is mostly because of our ability to declare disasters and need to move money. You sign that paper that you've declared disaster and you're moving $2 to $5 million in an instant just to meet payroll demands. So for us, I'm cautious of not wanting to simply move it into consulting unless we most certainly have the expectation and a budget that we would appropriate that amount. If we don't have that, we need to not just simply carry money in a line item to carry it there. I would be far more in support of us working through an ad hoc committee that can really revise the budget policies and the bylaws wholesale to really be reflective. I think if that it's a good time as we look at the support services agreement with the county and cleaning that up, we should clean up ourselves as well and making sure that it's in line with our objectives. I just don't see a third of operating reserves being in line with our objectives. I also don't see any documented justification for simply moving the overage over to consulting without approximations of what that would look like.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramos. Other comments?
Well, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. You sure?
Yep.
So first, big picture, I'm much more in favor of the A1 versus the A2, and that's potentially in line with what our executive officer, the direction that you were going. I think we're going to continue to work on this SSA. We're going to continue to work on all this. Budgets are there to be amended at any particular time. I do think the amounts, when you look at either A1 or A2, but I have A1 in front of me, the year-over-year increase to all of the jurisdictions is pretty significant. And I know for some jurisdictions who are struggling with, and we don't have Calistoga in the room, but they're struggling right now with how to make a $50,000 allocation to their Boys and Girls Club, which they've done historically year over year. So these dollars matter. They really matter. And yet at the same time, I think, we have a formula that we work with, and we look at percentages to the county and all the cities in terms of what that is. I think we're making a pretty significant jump in terms of the admin services. We already sort of discussed that at length at the last meeting. So while it's a significant increase, I would personally be supportive of moving forward with Exhibit A1. In terms of your second question, and maybe we'll handle it differently, this is more of a question than anything else. I don't understand how the NSD, SOI, and Monticello Park really fits in to how we're looking at the budget. So can you answer that? Because then, and actually before you do, I think the reserves, we can't just kind of shell game move money around and put it here or there. I think there was in previous years, some kind of an intention to say, as we do these MSRs, it's more than just a reserve that might be, under traditional definition for the county or for cities, what those emergency reserves are used for. So my second question is, can we look at our reserves as also a place where we are going to build some funds for a future report that hasn't been identified that we can't really put in a line item? So those are my two questions.
Great. So maybe we'll turn to staff and see what we can learn.
Yes, thank you. So first, I just want to address a comment from Commissioner Ramos that I certainly agree. We ought to take a look at our budgeting policies and be more clear when we say we want to keep reserves at a certain level. Well, why is that? I think we need to explain that better. We need to be able to answer that. And so it is a good time for us to take a look at ourselves. And staff is happy to work with an ad hoc committee if that's the desire, or bring something to the full commission, whatever the commission would like to see there. Then another comment, I might be the one who's confused here, but Commissioner Ramos noted being uncomfortable moving $45,000 to consulting services without knowing really what exactly that looks like. I'll attempt to make a clarifying comment that we're not looking at adding anything else to the expense account, consulting services. There's the $45,000 that's in there that we know we need to finish the MSR. I was simply suggesting we might draw down our reserves to pay for that portion of the budget. So it would basically cut agency dues by $45,000. So that would reduce the burden on the funding agencies. That was the intent. So we're not looking at adding anything more in terms of costs or agency impact. We would be, that comment was to help the agencies a bit and reduce the burden. And then just going back, then Commissioner Painter asked, how does the Napa Sanitation District sphere review relate to the budget? It's really, so here's something also we should look at is our policy on the work program, which is actually contained within the policy on municipal service reviews. Personally, I'd like to see that extracted out somewhere else. This was the history there is that we decided somewhat abruptly we need a formal work plan, and we just didn't have a place to put it. So we parked it in the MSR policy and just never came back to that to find something better. So the Napa Sanitation District sphere, it's a report that at some point we've got to review their sphere. It needs to happen. It's supposed to happen roughly every 5 years. So it doesn't impact the budget in any way. The work program really is separate from the budget, except when there is clearly a project that will require budgeted funds. In this case, it's an in-house study. So no impact whatsoever on the budget dollars. And then if there's another question that I missed, let me know. I may have missed something here.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for clarifying. And the first point, I think I might have introduced some unclarity there. So thank you for straightening that out. Did you get the answer you needed on the work program piece of it and the sphere of influence?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what the MSR is for the sanitation district. I just didn't know how it related to the budget and if there was a budget decision on that. But I think you've explained that. And you also really helped clarify the concept of drawing down the reserves to cover that $45,000, which I think is really smart, and I would very much support that. So I'm sorry I didn't put the dots together when you were describing it.
All right, thank you. So I think what we've heard, to just recap, is a staff recommendation for the first option, that's Exhibit A1, with an amendment that would draw down that $45,000. That's we don't have any formal motion, and there's plenty of time for more discussion, but I just wanted to frame that. So you had a question.
I just wanted to note that a reserve and a fund balance are not necessarily the same thing. And probably, I think to Commissioner Ramos's point, we have to look at the budget policies and do some work on the budget policies. But you know, if we do have an emergency reserve, I mean, first of all, it is kind of high. So looking at the policies around that, but that should be for emergencies, whatever those we think those might be, versus we might have a fund balance that we draw from to do certain kinds of work. I mean, normally you would put the money in the consulting line item because it's core to the activities of the agency. And so you would want to see those core activities in the line items of the budget and not quote unquote pulled from reserve. But I understand what we're trying to do in terms of lowering the cost to the jurisdictions. So that makes sense. And maybe once we become a little more in line, or I mean, we have a lot of whatever you want to call reserve/fund balance right now. And so we can do it that way. It's a little strange for a budget to do that, but maybe if we also find a way to break apart our true emergency reserve or true reserve versus our fund balance, and we can reflect that in our policies so that we're pulling from fund balance to do the MSR work, but not from quote unquote reserve. So I just think that that distinction needs to be made somewhere.
Thank you, Commissioner Gallagher. I'm adding that to the list of future work that could happen too. So Commissioner Mueller.
I just want to, I'll give you my thoughts in a moment, but that's exactly one of the problems we have with the county doing the budget. We got something kind of came up a while ago. Why don't we just move this line item? We tried that. It got bounced back. You can't do that. They don't allow us to have a fund balance. So we have a consulting line, but there has to be some justification for that. You can't just like have a big number. So over the years, we've really kind of used, because we didn't really have another mechanism, these reserves to really kind of fund some of these, the more recent direction we're taking for some countywide MSRs. And so that's been the mechanism, just because we've been kind of put in a bit of this box. So if we can figure out how to get out of that box, I totally agree with you. But right now, that's why we are where we are. So I think, and just to kind of add to that too, I appreciates that, some of the other, jurisdictions are maybe struggling with their balancing their budgets. We're struggling with trying to balance, our budget too here with a lot of discussion. So I think that kind of, to me, I think that if we are very judicious and really have a budget that makes sense, that, we've really kind of looked at every item very, very closely, that, we still have to kind of do our work. And, that's just a kind of an ethical question, or not really an ethical question, but, maybe another kind of question for workshops is because I can tell you from some of the comments I've heard, especially with the countywide fire MSR, some of the name names, some of the smaller jurisdictions, they're very, very nervous about this because, a lot of they have to deal with their public who is, very feels very protective of their fire department. Well, we're not going to go in and change any of that. We're just putting together, here are all the facts, here are all the numbers, because everyone's got different numbers about, ours is cheaper than this, and this is cheaper than that. So that's really kind of what we're putting down. So I think that's a kind of an overall kind of work plan kind of question that we should have. It's a philosophical kind of question. Is this something we really want to do? It's just a matter of where the political will is. We're all very sensitive about, what our other jurisdictions, say and what their concerns are. But do we really think that this is something we should do? So that's kind of for a later discussion. On the work plan, since I'm just kind of reading through my notes, because we're talking about the Napa Sand MSR, we have a smaller jurisdiction that is probably, 10, 12 years late in their MSR, and just really doesn't want to do it. But, again, that's really our job to do it. So we can bring that in-house. It's going to, cost us time and staff to kind of do it. But I think these things are important, especially when they're that old. And, I'm not going to speculate because I really don't know why they don't want to do it, but, it needs to be done. This is our job and our responsibility. So, some of that we might, since we don't really have another, fund balance line to kind of use that, some of that might come out of reserve. So with that said, I do agree with the status quo. I am fine with using our some of our reserves to kind of take care of that consulting item because it's a one-time item. If we use reserves, but what that's really going to do too, if we don't ever have any consulting in the future, it'll be fine. But once you start kind of subsidizing these fees or the dues that we charge everybody, you're just kind of kicking the can down the road. It's like, okay, we got carved off, some percent this year, but that percent isn't going away because our staff costs more time. It costs us to do all this stuff. So that bump, you're kind of masking it for 1 year, but it's going to kind of come back that next year. So I think we just have to be very careful how we do that. The town of Yountville did that a long time ago. People had an idea. It's like, well, we should use general fund money to, help pay our water rates. And then they did that for years. And then, when another council came in and said, no, we don't want to subsidize that anymore because we can't, then those rates jumped up a lot. So all the people benefited for a long time, which is very similar to what we're talking about here. But then the rates had to go up a lot. So future people paid for what past people benefited. So I think there's sometimes it sounds good, but then when you have to unravel some of this stuff, it's really challenging. So I'm fine with the status quo and using the reserves to kind of take care of those consulting fees one time. But I think this is one thing that really, when we work through the SSA and something comes up, it comes up a lot, and it's really hard for us to kind of plan for these things. So, because I have several ideas for some other great, countywide MSRs, and even, in our strategic plan, following up on our county, water and wastewater. We've got our last agenda item, which I'll not talk about too much right now because that's the last one, but there's some great ideas in there. So there's some more money, and that's really our only bucket, as I like to call it, that we can kind of go to for some of this work. So, and everyone can have a different opinion on that. We haven't really had a strategic philosophical discussion, but, the Napasan, I know that's kind of big for everybody, but I guess my hot button is like really getting an MSDR done. That's like 10 or 12 years. Am I wrong on that date? Really, we really have to stay on top of, the stuff that's really grossly overdue right now. So.
Thank you for that feedback. I've written a lot of that down. Commissioner Khan, did you have any comments that you want to make? Okay, right. Yeah, it's confusing enough. That's right. So I had a couple comments. I agree with what has been said thus far in terms of the high level things. I support the status quo. I support this using that $45,000 to, and this point about a one-time, I think is worthwhile to note. And then I also like this idea of a future, whether it's a ad hoc subcommittee, however, and maybe my suggestion would be to kick that to staff to bring back at a future meeting of some ideas of how we might formulate that. But I think the things I've heard are a revision of the budget policy, particularly the reserve item and all that goes along with it. Commissioner Ramos, you mentioned bylaws also, and Commissioner Painter, the work program and how it feels. And Brendan, I think you brought this up too, that perhaps we can untether it in a way. So that could be another item that this work, that this ad hoc looks at. And then this point that Commissioner Mueller brought up about the true reserve versus fund balance, and you referenced this too, and how we're a little bit constrained by the county format and what are our options there. So that's a lot of things for that future ad hoc, but I think that's worth noting. I also wanted to make the comment, and Brendan, you mentioned this at the beginning, that you met with the Napa Area Managers Group. And first of all, thank you for doing that. I think improving that line of communication is very important. And I did hear from one city manager who said, we're not understanding, we get that you guys are independent, and so help us understand more why we need to pay more for more independent, so I think they also need to be brought along. And then if we can do that, then we can get to the points that you're talking about, that we need to do our own work too. And sometimes our costs are going to go up, but it's going to be easier if they understand more what we're trying to accomplish. And so, I mean, this budget item actually reflects back on everything we just talked about between 1 and 2 p.m. So some nice synergy here today. So with that, I think I'm cognizant of the time. I think we have to be out of here by 4. So is there more comments or a motion that someone would like to make?
I'm more than happy. What was that? You mentioned the with the motion, the change. The change would be to use reserves to pay for the $45,000 for consulting fees. Correct. All right. Now, help me find all. I'm going to make them all. If it's I don't mind once I get to the right page. So the very first one, if we were going to approve status quo budget, is that attachment 3?
A status quo budget would be attachment 1, exhibit A1. And
Attachment 1, okay, hold on, let me get to that one. So, page 103, thank you, that's very helpful. My iPad is the same as yours, and it is not. Okay, let's try, oh, there it is, okay. All right, I will make a motion that we approve resolution with no number, the local agency formation commission of Napa County adopting a final budget for fiscal year 24-25 with the amendment that we use reserves to pay $45,000 for the consulting fee line item. Have I got the right one?
I'm not sure it's needed. I'll look to council to confirm. Do we need to specify for the public record, we would be, that $45,000 reduction in revenues would go to the, it would be the intergovernmental revenues, and it would be proportionally spread out over the 6 funding agencies.
Yeah, I think as long as that's clear to the commission on what he's referring to, I think that's sufficient.
Nope, it's not clear to me. One more time.
Okay. Let's go into a little more
Maybe I'm the
detail.
only one, but
So I'll do my best.
Okay.
So we're in agreement. We'll use $45,000 in reserves to cover the consulting service cost, since
Right.
it's a one-time cost.
Right.
The way that will functionally appear in the budget is that we are reducing intergovernmental revenues by $45,000.
Right.
And so the bottom line on the budget will say negative
we're
$45,000.
reducing expenses, not revenue.
The expenses actually will stay the same since the $45,000.
I see. Okay. Okay. It's revenue. All right. Got it. Okay.
And then the amount of money owed from each agency is reduced proportionally.
Right.
I think that's what Brendan's saying.
Correct. But that just kind of comes along. We don't have to say that in the amendment. That's just a consequence of this action.
Yes, that's my understanding. That's an automatic formula that's been agreed to by
Right.
the cities. We
Okay.
have no control over that.
All right, thank you. And Commissioner Painter is going to add some motions.
If just to be clear and concise, and for a matter of time, we also want to look at adopting a resolution to adopt the fee schedule as contained in attachment 2, and a resolution to adopt the work program for fiscal year 24-25 as shown in attachment 3.
But don't we have to do one at a time?
We do this one at a time, yeah.
Yeah, you could do them separately. Sure.
But we
So-
can do them together.
Oh, okay. Well, we are at the edge of our complexity and abilities here. So I think what I will do is take Commissioner Muller's motion.
Motion.
We will hold Commissioner Painter's. Is there a second for Commissioner Muller's? Yes. Okay. There's a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Commissioner Painter.
At the risk of maybe doing something you said I shouldn't do, I'm going to propose that we adopt 2 resolutions. The first to adopt a fee schedule as contained in attachment 2, and the second resolution to adopt a work program for fiscal year 24-25 as contained in attachment 3.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And do we need a motion for the idea of the ad hoc to look at the budget policy and bylaws?
Well, we don't have creation of an ad hoc on the agenda for today. So I would say if you want to officially create one, let's bring that back at a future meeting.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you. All right. So with that, we will move on to agenda item 8A. Proposed Redwood Road / Rooston Lane annexation to the Napa Sanitation District and associated CEQA findings.
I think the simplest way to summarize this one is to look at page 2 of this report and take a look at the map that's there. It becomes very obvious that this property is well within the urban area. It is within the city of Napa, and it was zoned for an infill residential development, which is what is occurring here. The land is now, oh goodness, my computer just stopped. That's not helpful. Anyway, the land is vacant now. It would allow, it has been approved, the tentative map has been approved by the city, and conditions of approval are included in there. One of those conditions is annexation to the sewer district, which is what would occur here, and that would allow sewer service for the 6 residential units in the subdivision. And you will note in your packet there was information with regard to the city's environmental review of this. The city is lead agency, and LAFCO serves as a responsible agency. So with that in mind, as responsible agency, it is recommended that LAFCO also adopt CEQA findings that show that this project is exempt and the reasons why. Also of note is the fact that this is within the sphere of influence of the sanitary district, and it does comply with all of your policies and procedures, and we are recommending approval. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do not have to, this doesn't require a public hearing, but I will take a moment to ask if there is any public comment on this item. Okay, great. Then I will bring it back to the commission for questions or comments. Commissioner Painter.
I will just make the comment that, as Dawn already described, this was approved by City Council in June of 2023. This is really, in fact, somewhat procedural in nature because, as you already explained, conditions of approval were attached to the project that require this annexation. I'll certainly allow other commissioners to make comment, but I'd be happy to make a recommendation to adopt the resolution as proposed.
I'll second.
So that was a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. And that brings us to item 9A for discussion, a report from University of California, Berkeley on LAFCO and water system consolidation. Brendan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll handle this one. Just a bit of brief background, which is in the staff report, but might benefit the public to hear that in January of 2024, the University of California, Berkeley Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources published a report titled LAFCO and Water System Consolidation, Bridging the Gap Between Local and State Regulators to Stop and Reverse Water System Fragmentation. And the report is included as Attachment 1 to the staff report. The report focuses on the human right to water and ongoing discussions involving the consolidation of small water systems, and also acknowledges the lack of communication and coordination amongst state and local regulators, including LAFCO. The report provides more details on the existing challenges, opportunities, and also recommendations to remedy some of these barriers. And notably, LAFCO MSRs, or municipal service reviews, were highlighted for the important role they play in evaluating water system consolidation. This is another opportunity to mention the Commission's countywide water and wastewater municipal service review adopted in 2020, which included a summary of the small water systems, such as mutual water companies, which are not run by government agencies and are typically regulated by the CPUC and could easily be overlooked. These systems oftentimes are not even discovered by LAFCOs in some counties, and so if there was to be a water system consolidation discussion, oftentimes these smaller systems are not in the conversation. However, we caught them and summarized them, and the 2020 MSR recommended further discussion of the potential benefits associated with consolidation of water systems throughout Napa County, or other shared arrangements that could help out those in need. And further, the Commission's strategic plan includes a goal to understand how this MSR may benefit the region. So perfect timing. And in addition to all of this, the UC Berkeley Research Group is conducting ongoing meetings with LAFCO executive officers to continue discussing their report's recommendations. Dawn and I are both part of that group. We each attended the first meeting roughly a month ago, and the second meeting is being scheduled later this month. So with that in mind, staff is seeking feedback from the commission. If you have any key questions or issues you'd like us to raise, that we can then do some research and come back with an update at a future commission meeting. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Great, and I'd love to hear from my fellow commissioners, but I do want to ask one question of staff, which is based on your meeting and this report. I'd love to hear your recommendations and ideas too. But let me open it up to the commissioners at this point too. Commissioner Mueller.
This was a really long document, but when I got to this, I got really excited. I just thought this was a really fabulous initiative that they did. I thought it was an excellent report. This one, I think, I know a lot about LAFCO. I learned stuff. I really learned a lot just about the roles and responsibilities of the State Water Resource Board and the CPUC and how they're all connected to LAFCO. I thought that was really some great explanation. So, but in thinking back to our, we keep wanting to, as I mentioned earlier, it's in our strategic plan to kind of consider following up on our countywide water and wastewater report. And I think that this is kind of leading us a bit in that direction. They kind of gave us probably the easiest road to kind of consider, which was just a managerial oversight over all the water systems. You can save staff. You could have really some smart people from one water area kind of helping others that don't seem to be that might need some help. So if I was going to give staff any recommendation, I'd really like for you to kind of bring back, if anyone's really done just the managerial piece, because I think that a lot of people think that we're going to start giving town X's water to city Y, and that's just that's not. I don't think that's really reasonable or where we want to go. But this managerial piece and really making sure that everybody has the same regulatory oversight, and really sharing staff too, because sometimes, especially for wastewater, you need this operator 3, which is really expensive. You can't find them. They don't really have to be full-time, and sharing those, it just makes kind of a lot of sense to me. So, but the whole managerial piece over the water, I think, makes a lot of sense. Also, I would like for you to, there was a little hint of it in here, but really kind of explore groundwater with the people you're talking about, because I know on this commission, when we put together the countywide water and wastewater, we had groundwater in there, but there was some commissioners who really wanted to separate that out. And once that's all kind of done with recommendations, I'd like at least to be an attachment, because I like all those pieces together. So any information, I think, in terms of groundwater, because I know, the county's doing a lot of that right now, and just to kind of touch bases where that is. But I just like this report a lot. So thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Mueller. Commissioner Khan.
So, excuse me, a few meetings ago, Reyes Lopez from Calistoga City Council was here, and I met her at the WELL conference, which is Water Education for Latino Leadership, and it was a phenomenal conference. They focus a lot on municipal water systems and the equity or the lack of equity. And so if she can be of help or pull in any resources from WELL, I would ask you to reach out to her, because she has, many times we talked about, how you might be able to use her resources or information or experience. So I just want to pass that along.
Great idea. I'm glad you remembered that. Commissioner Painter.
Yes, I also thought this was a really interesting report with a lot of information in terms of feedback for you. I think, what we've done with the MSR for water and wastewater has really set some good examples. I will say I'm pretty certain that some of these managerial ideas are already moving forward in terms of purchase of chemicals together, shared staff, that sort of thing. It just makes all the sense in the world. And if we helped in any way to do that, I think that's really terrific. We have so many different types of water systems, and consolidations can generally be a good thing. But they're complicated. So what I would just say is, as you talk to folks and look at it, you need to think about some of the agencies. For example, a larger agency taking on trying to fix a smaller water provider's infrastructure is an issue under Prop 218, right? Because you can't ask the ratepayers from one jurisdiction to cover the costs of fixing somebody else's infrastructure problems. So while the managerial pieces I think are really, really great, I think we just want to be mindful that when it comes to consolidation, and really, quite honestly, I think a lot of the issues are around inadequate infrastructure. So, I don't have any answers to that right now. I'm just pointing out that that's something that you want to be careful of in conversations.
Thank you. Commissioner Ramos or Commissioner Gallagher, do you guys have any input? Okay, great. I think the one thing I would add is that we at NICLOG recently heard from the public works directors of all the jurisdictions. And to your point, there is a lot that they are doing together in this space. So one suggestion I would have, I like all the ones that you've collected at this point, might be to have them back or in a discussion about where things are and where they see possibilities too, because I think they've got a lot of that on the ground experience. But also we could probably encourage other avenues as well. So that would be my suggestion. Is there any public comment on this item?
All right, Gary finally gets to talk.
Two people.
Is this live?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. I'm Gary Margadant from up on Mount Vita Road, and I'm pretty concerned about water, as we all should be. And one of the things that I know with this consolidation, if you're trying to do a municipal service over all of the county, would mean that you have a little bit more of equity that's distributed throughout the county. Right now, you have St. Helena that has two wells. They're the wells that are right by the Pope Street Bridge, and it sucks the river dry. And is that due to the fact that, they are trying to service too many people and that they don't have the actual water resources to do that? And if they spread it out throughout the valley, it might be a better application, because they service some wineries. They service some big units of concentrated water use. Well, one of the things coming up right now is the Inn at the Abbey. And they're going to pick all of that up because they have a water line that supplies water to that parcel. What's going to happen? Is this the way you want to hook it up, or do you want to do it the way that they have this new resort that's going in at the end of the railroad line that is on the Krug property? Now, they say that they're going to use the groundwater for all of that. I mean, and you can see that the varying balances here are just a little bit skewed. And I really think that something on an overall basis about the overall water, whether it's groundwater or surface water or things like this, it's going to be a little more equitable if you discuss it on a basis as to what the county can supply in the full county itself. And so I think that's something that really is a positive for a complete municipal system throughout the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Margadant.
Hello. My name is Asia Jones. I don't actually live in the county, but I do work for Water Audit California. And I'd like to say that we're very in support of this being managed at a county level, or at least thought of at a county level, to increase efficiencies for what Gary here actually segued in very well. So that wasn't planned. That was lovely. But truly managing these resources at a larger scale would most likely have a benefit not only economically to the county, but also environmentally, which we would very much like to see. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment and for waiting patiently through everything else that we've done today. So, all right, I will bring it back to the commission to find out if there are other remarks. Commissioner Ramos.
Thank you. The only comment that I would say is I think we really do have to proceed with caution when it comes to groundwater, that it falls within the jurisdiction of the county's GSA, of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. It's a completely new area from prior times of when municipal water services have been looked at, and certainly a different category of jurisdiction when it comes to wheeled water versus extracted water. So I think it would behoove us to really understand and get greater clarification through our council before we are too expansive on what we include. Wheeled water and municipal water and wastewater, absolutely, that's our jam. Like we can definitely look into that. But when it gets into the groundwater component and the overlay of the GSA, which is already an overlay on top of other municipalities, I've got a red flag going on. So I would just say we would need to have, I think, some council opinion on how far we can delve into on groundwater.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramos. I actually think that's a good, we could formulate a recommendation there, which is to ask staff or council to, check in with the GSA council to just say, we're interested in this. What can we do? And where are the guardrails that they see too? All right. With that, we're not expecting an action or a motion here, so we can wrap that up, I think, and I can't get back to my agenda, but I think that was the last thing we will do is ask for commissioner comments, and I believe you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I was contacted by Senator Curzon. She is now the head of the new local government agency, took over that agency or rotated out or however it works from Cecilia Aguilar Curry. And so she reached out through LAFCO and she wanted to know more about LAFCO and LAFCO. So off I went to Sacramento. I didn't have an agenda, so I couldn't get reimbursed, but just another FYI. But so it was a great meeting. It was like the first time Cecilia used to be on LAFCO, so she knew all about it. So, but it's really great that some of these, different agencies are kind of reaching out and saying, "Hey, we heard you guys kind of do a lot." It was quite interesting. She, after we just probably had a budget ad hoc meeting or something, she goes, "Well, how come you guys never come and ask us for funding?" I was like kind of shocked, so I didn't even say anything at all, but it was very, very interesting. So just wanted to report on that.
That's great. Thank you for doing that and sharing your expertise too. Sounds good. Are there other commissioner comments or future agenda items people want to suggest at this point? Okay, well then I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting, and our next meeting will be August, tell us the date again, please.
August 5th.
August 5th, great. And we will be in this building again at that point.
Actually, I believe we'll be at the County Board of Supervisors
Back at the
chambers
county.
by then.
Okay, got it. All right. Thank you, Yountville. With that,
Everybody
we're adjourned.
likes to come to Yountville. We can always change. It's like, if we're open, you can come.